Good morning. Well, of course, let's bring you the latest now on the budget. We understand President Cyril Ramaphosa leading the final cabinet meeting this morning, trying to ensure that all of the political parties involved in the national coalition have come to some kind of agreement before the Finance Minister, Enoch Godongwana, gives his speech, well, scheduled now for the second time for 2 o'clock this afternoon. You will, of course, see that speech and what happens in Parliament right here. Let's update you now on the situation in Parliament itself. Newzroom Afrika's Ziyanda Ngcobo joins you now live from Cape Town, from the parliamentary precinct. Ziyanda, good morning to you. A lot of expectation and anticipation ahead of this afternoon. What are political parties outside the national coalition saying about what's happening today?
Well, that's exactly what we're going to try and find out, Stephen, because, of course, they would not be represented in that cabinet meeting that is currently underway. You'll know that in the leaked budget speech, there was a 2 percentage point VAT hike. We understand that that will be significantly smaller. But let's bring in the ACDP's Mr. Steve Swart and Bosses Musi Maimane to talk about this. And thank you to both of you. You're not in the GNU. You're not represented in that meeting. What is the position of the ACDP as it stands? And I mean, lots of talk about our public spending needing to be reduced and SARS needing to be better capacitated, but more importantly, the public confidence in the way in which our public purse is managed.
No, absolutely. And taxpayers are demanding better value for all the taxes they are paid. And therefore, when we look now, we see renewed power outages, we see water crises, we see logistics crises, we see dysfunctional municipalities. Taxpayers are not getting the value for their money, and they are demanding better accountability. From our perspective, we cannot justify any VAT increase. We believe that there is other space to save. For example, SARS can collect 800 billion rand if they are given the additional resources. Even 10% of that will cover the 60 billion rand shortfall. And as you know, the ACDP has always said, give the SIU, give the NPA, give the Hawks additional resources. They can collect the tens of billions of rands that were stolen through state capture and corruption that is sitting in overseas bank accounts. And lastly, we would say there are some items that we cannot afford, such as the NHI. That must be postponed. We are opposed to that in totality, but it is unaffordable. And some elements of the Bella Act, such as the early childhood development, that's 7 billion rand a year. Surely that can also be postponed so that we can at first balance our books, have fiscal consolidation, so we're not spending the billions of rands, that's 1 billion rand per day, just on debt service costs. Totally unaffordable and unsustainable.
I mean, 22 cents per rand that we're paying back, Mr. Maimane, but 60 billion rand needs to be found from somewhere. What do you say from an optics perspective, what many have deemed as a threat by our Finance Minister, Enoch Godongwana, to say, well, I'm increasing the VAT to fund the social relief distress grants?
You are increasing the VAT to pay for state capture. You are increasing the VAT. You are punishing people whose money was stolen, again, by saying you must increase their tax. That's what this is. It's not about saying you increase the VAT to fund the SRD. There are other ways to cut, as my colleagues have already spoken. I identified 60 billion rands in where the cuts are. It's about merging agencies. It's about ensuring that you halve the cabinet. It's about stopping some of the SOE bailouts. It's about ensuring that you build efficiency into your budget. And ultimately, no one has ever taxed themselves to prosperity. It's about funding for growth, and that's focused on infrastructure. And if you do that well enough, you'll be able to, in the medium term, overcome the shortfall and create better conditions for employment. On the SRD, I do think it's a policy choice, right? We are at a point now where we're not making good and bad choices. We're making worse and much worse choices. And so if you are choosing within that space, if I was to suspend the SRD grant, I would translate some of that revenue, or at least some of that saving, into an extended public works program so that people can be able to align it to work and compensation in that regard. That is one route. But again, you have to make that policy choice.
But sorry, can I jump in there? But you still need the money to fund that, right? Because it's not like you're going to pay those EPWP workers 350 rand, which is where the SRD grant stands.
No, it's when I talk about funding it, it obviously comes from the savings you would accrue by doing an expenditure cut the elimination of what the Auditor General describes as 52 billion rands of wasteful and fruitless expenditure within municipalities, if you capacitate those municipalities better. If you are going to spend on infrastructure, which has already been budgeted for in the current budget framework, you can use some of that money by simply doing a rail revitalization process. That has economic spin-offs, it's infrastructure build, but then you align it to expanded public works. So I don't think South Africa's problem is about trying to tax people more. It's actually about policy choices. It's about ensuring that you cut expenditure that's wasteful. And more than anything, it's about avoiding a budget blowout, because already in the budget there's a 5% deficit. We cannot afford to just keep spending and hoping that in the end will be able to achieve economic growth.
Bad policies there, according to Mr. Maimane, causing, contributing towards this crisis. You're both not in the GNU. Let's talk about how you as an opposition are perhaps, organizing yourselves outside of this, because, there's lots of talk that maybe the ANC is flirting now with the EFF and MK party, and you also have a responsibility as opposition parties to ensure that the best interests of the country are always top of mind.
Well, we definitely are speaking to parties such as BOSA, such as Action South Africa, in setting up a centrist, constructive opposition role. Remember, there's a need for accountability, and my colleague chairs the committees of appropriations, doing excellent work there, and I think there's a definite centrist role now that can play, not just the breakers on the left, but a centrist role of parties that holds the GNU accountable. So when it comes to policies and when it comes to issues such as low economic growth that my colleague referred to, 0.6%, we're going to get nowhere there. But what is the main and what makes it even worse is the fact that we might have AGOA and the US trade war existing, which will impact our exports even more. And that is directly accountable to the ANC for its foreign policy issues, which has affronted the US, and now we've got problems there. These issues, foreign policy, need to be sorted out quickly to avoid even further economic growth problems that we are faced with and escalating debt. So we think there is definite space for us to play that role of constructive opposition.